Hello, my friends. Tonight, we'll take a quiet journey into the heart of one of the most fascinating civilizations the world has ever known. A land of sprawling cities, golden palaces, and bustling bazaars, where the scent of saffron drifted through narrow alleyways and the sound of water trickled from marble fountains. I'm talking about Persia, not in its struggling years, not in its decline, but at the very height of its power and beauty. And before we begin, I'd like to know, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it where you are? It's always fascinating to imagine this same story being heard in so many different corners of the world. When Persia was at its zenith during the rule of the Achaemenid kings, it was more than just a kingdom. It was a vast empire, stretching from the valleys of the Nile to the mountains of Central Asia, from the edges of Greece to the shores of the Indus River. Imagine the variety of landscapes under its banner. Deserts where the air shimmered with heat, snow-covered peaks where icy winds bit at travelers' faces, fertile plains where wheat swayed in the breeze, and lush gardens that seemed to have been plucked from a dream. The people of Persia at this time lived in a world deeply influenced by order and harmony. The king, the Shahanshah, or King of Kings, was not just a ruler but a symbol of the empire's unity. His court was a place of glittering splendor. Visitors described walls covered with fine tapestries, floors polished until they reflected the soft glow of oil lamps, and great halls where columns rose like forest trunks, holding up ceilings painted in vivid blues and golds. The air was heavy with the smell of burning incense and fresh-cut flowers arranged in bronze bowls. But while the royal court dazzled with its opulence, daily life for the people was just as rich in its own way. In the larger cities like Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana, mornings began early. Merchants would open their stalls, laying out bright fabrics dyed with indigo, carmine, and turmeric. You could find anything in a Persian market, from gleaming silver cups to baskets of pistachios, from carved ivory combs to the sweetest dates you could imagine. The hum of voices, the clink of coins, and the occasional bleating of a goat being led through the crowd created a constant music. Food in Persia was a feast for the senses. Ordinary folk might eat bread baked in clay ovens, still warm and soft, served with fresh cheese and herbs like mint and tarragon. Stews simmered slowly over small fires, filled with lentils, onions, and sometimes lamb. For those who could afford more luxury, the meals were more elaborate. Rice perfumed with saffron, pomegranates scattered like jewels across roasted meats, honey drizzled over pastries stuffed with crushed nuts. The empire's vastness meant that spices from India, fruits from distant orchards, and even ice from mountain peaks could appear on a noble's table. Entertainment was a part of life too. Nobles enjoyed hunting, not just as a sport, but as a way to display skill and courage. They rode powerful horses, trained to respond to the slightest touch, and loosed arrows with such precision that travelers wrote about it for decades afterward. In the cities, music filled the air at festivals. The strumming of lutes, the beat of frame drums, the haunting sound of reed flutes. Storytellers gathered small crowds in courtyards, weaving tales of ancient heroes and distant lands, their voices rising and falling like waves. Persian gardens deserve their own mention. They were not simply decorative but deeply symbolic. Designed in perfect symmetry, they mirrored the idea of paradise, a place of balance, abundance, and eternal beauty. Streams of water divided the gardens into 4 parts, shaded by cypress and pomegranate trees, where roses bloomed in endless rows. Families would stroll in the cool shade, sipping sherbet made from fruit juice and snow. Of course, Persia's greatness rested not just on beauty but on a sophisticated system of governance. Roads stretched like veins across the empire, patrolled by mounted couriers who could carry messages from one end to the other in astonishing speed for the time. The famous royal road allowed the Shahanshah's orders, sealed in wax and carried in leather pouches, to reach distant provinces without delay. Along the way, way stations offered food, water, and rest to both messengers and travelers, a rare comfort in an ancient world where long journeys were often harsh and dangerous. Religion shaped life as well. Zoroastrianism, the main faith, taught that life was a constant struggle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness. fire temples, with their ever-burning flames, stood as reminders of purity and order. Priests in white robes tended to these fires, offering prayers that drifted upward like the smoke itself. And yet, even in this structured society, there were moments of personal freedom and joy. Weddings filled the air with laughter and song, markets buzzed with gossip and bargaining, and children played in dusty streets, their games echoing the same patterns found in villages far away from the capital. This was Persia at its peak, a place where elegance and efficiency met, where power was matched with culture, and where daily life was a blend of simple pleasures and grand visions. As we move deeper into this world, we'll explore not just the palaces and the politics, but the intimate details, what people wore, how they traveled, what they whispered to each other in the quiet corners of the marketplace. Because to truly understand Persia, we must walk alongside its people. From the Shahanshah in his golden hall to the baker turning bread in the heat of the oven, and see their lives unfold piece by piece. The life of Persia at its height was not just a story of kings and marble halls, but a living network of farmers, craftsmen, traders, and travelers. If you walked away from the grandeur of the cities and followed the dusty roads into the countryside, you would find a world that moved to the steady rhythm of the seasons. Fields stretched in neat rows, green in the spring with young wheat and barley, golden in summer when the harvest neared. Farmers bent under the sun, guiding wooden plows drawn by oxen, their faces weathered from years of working the land. Water was life here, and the Persians had mastered its control. In the dry regions, they built ingenious underground channels called qanats, carrying water from mountain springs to the fields below. It was slow, precise work. Tunnels dug by hand, supported by stone, allowing crops to thrive even in places where the earth would have been too dry to sustain them. This system not only fed the empire but allowed villages far from rivers to flourish with orchards of apricots, figs, and almonds. In these villages, homes were built from mud brick, their walls thick enough to keep out the heat of the day and the chill of the night. Roofs were often flat, serving as sleeping spaces during warm summer evenings when the air indoors felt heavy. Inside, floors were covered with woven rugs, not the grand carpets of palaces, but sturdy ones dyed in earthy reds and browns, their patterns telling quiet stories passed down through generations. Morning in a Persian village began early. The call of roosters was joined by the distant sound of a shepherd's flute as he led his flock toward pasture. Women would start the day's work by grinding grain on flat stones, the rhythmic scrape echoing through courtyards. Bread dough would be shaped and baked in clay ovens, sometimes pressed against the hot inner walls so it puffed into soft, round loaves. Alongside bread, people often ate yogurt made from goat's milk, a tangy contrast to the sweetness of dried dates. Clothing was both practical and beautiful. For common folk, loose tunics and wide trousers allowed for movement in the heat, while a simple sash at the waist held tools or small pouches. Head coverings shielded the eyes from the sun, and leather sandals or simple boots protected the feet on long walks. In wealthier households, fabrics became richer. Linen and fine wool, sometimes even imported silks dyed with colors that caught the light like a jewel. Travel was a constant thread in Persian life, for this was an empire bound together by movement. Merchants traveled in caravans, their camels loaded with sacks of spices, bolts of cloth, and jars of fragrant oil. The sound of bells tied to the camels' necks marked their slow progress along the royal road, while guards on horseback kept watch for bandits. Stopping at caravanserais, roadside inns, these travelers would share stories from faraway cities, trading news along with goods. A merchant from Babylon might speak of strange festivals, while another from the Indus Valley could describe the taste of fruits unknown in Persia. The empire's diversity meant that the streets of its major cities were filled with a tapestry of languages. One might hear Old Persian spoken in the market, Aramaic in the government offices, Greek among scholars, and Elamite in the older quarters of Susa. This mix created a culture that was open to new ideas but also deeply proud of its own traditions. Festivals punctuated the year, the most famous being Nowruz, the New Year, celebrated at the spring equinox. Families cleaned their homes, lit fires to chase away the old year's darkness, and prepared tables with symbolic items. Fresh sprouts for renewal, mirrors for reflection, painted eggs for fertility. In the cities, the Shahanshah himself took part in ceremonies, reaffirming his role as protector and guide for the people. But life was not without hardship. Taxes had to be paid, harvests could fail, and sickness could spread quickly in crowded quarters. Yet even in these times, community was strong. Neighbors would gather to help each other repair a roof after a storm or share water during a dry season. There was a sense that survival depended on more than individual effort. It depended on the bonds between people. The Persian love for beauty showed even in the smallest things. Pottery painted in intricate designs, copper vessels polished until they shone, jewelry made from beads of lapis lazuli or carnelian. These were everyday objects, not just treasures for the elite. A farmer might drink from a cup with the same floral pattern as one found in a noble's hall, proof that the empire's artisans made beauty accessible to all. Evenings brought a slowing of the day's pace. The air would cool, and the sky would deepen into a velvet blue. In villages, families gathered in the courtyard for supper, perhaps a thick soup of lentils and herbs, with bread to dip into it. In cities, the richer households might entertain guests with dishes of roasted duck or delicate pastries flavored with rosewater. After the meal, conversation lingered, often moving into storytelling. Tales of ancient kings, mythical beasts, and faraway lands traveled easily from one generation to the next, each teller adding their own small embellishments. As the night deepened, lamps were lit, small clay vessels with flickering flames fueled by sesame oil. Shadows danced on the walls, and the world seemed to grow quieter, the distant sound of a dog barking or a donkey braying the only interruption. It was in these quiet moments that Persia revealed its true nature. Not just an empire of conquest and wealth, but a place of human warmth, where life was lived in patterns of work, rest, celebration, and care. If one were to follow the long roads of the Persian Empire for weeks on end, eventually the pulse of its trade would become impossible to miss. It was not just the exchange of goods that gave life to the empire's economy, but the exchange of ideas, beliefs, and customs. Along the royal road, the movement never truly stopped. Caravans might be caught in the golden light of dawn, their shadows stretching across the ground as camels plodded in slow rhythm. By midday, traders rested in the shade of tamarisk trees or beneath the awnings of roadside markets, their wares carefully covered to protect them from the heat. Of Persia's position between east and west meant that its markets were a meeting point for the world's treasures. From the east came silk, smooth and delicate, rolled into tight bundles that unfurled like flowing water when opened. Spices, cinnamon, cardamom, pepper, were stored in clay jars sealed with wax to preserve their rich aroma. From the west came fine olive oil, glassware from Phoenicia, and wine from the Mediterranean coast. From the empire's own heartlands came the highly prized Persian rugs, woven with colors that seemed to drink in the light. In the capital cities, the bazaars were labyrinths of color and texture. There were stalls selling dyed fabrics in deep indigo, crimson, and saffron, each piece bearing subtle patterns that told of the region where it was made. Goldsmiths displayed bracelets engraved with delicate floral designs, and potters set out rows of glazed bowls that reflected the sunlight like still pools of water. The noise was constant. Merchants calling out prices, bargaining voices rising and falling, the ring of hammers from a blacksmith's workshop. But trade was not the only engine that kept Persia strong. The empire's military presence was ever present, though not always looming. The soldiers of Persia were drawn from across its vast lands, each bringing their own traditions of warfare. The elite immortals, named for their unbroken number of 10,000 men, formed the core of the king's guard. Clad in scale armor that glinted like fish in sunlight, they marched with precision, their spears upright and their bows slung across their backs. Their discipline was legendary, but so too was their adaptability, for they could fight on foot or mounted, in open battle or tight formations. Cavalry played a vital role, especially in the wide plains where speed decided victory. Persian horses were bred for endurance and strength, and riders learned to guide them with minimal movement, keeping one hand free to draw the bow. In times of peace, these same skills were displayed in sport. Competitions of archery, riding, and wrestling that drew crowds eager to watch their champions perform. Art, too, was inseparable from Persian identity. The empire's wealth and stability allowed its craftsmen to push their work to levels of unmatched refinement. In stone reliefs carved into palace walls, kings were shown receiving ambassadors, the scenes filled with small details. Folds in the garments, the texture of beards, the intricate patterns of the gifts being offered. Painters decorated palace ceilings with vivid blues and golds, often using designs inspired by the geometry of gardens. Even metalworkers approached their craft as art, engraving hunting scenes into silver cups or shaping bronze into delicate oil lamps. Music was a constant companion in Persian life. It was said that the sound of the chong, a type of harp, could calm the spirit, while the rhythmic beat of the daf drum stirred energy during festivals. Flute players could be found in city squares, their tunes curling into the air like the scent of baking bread, drawing small circles of listeners who closed their eyes to savor each note. Religion also inspired much of the artistic expression. Zoroastrian fire temples might not have been covered in lavish decoration, but the sacred flames themselves were surrounded by beauty, the careful arrangement of polished stone, the symmetry of the courtyard, the soft sound of flowing water in a nearby basin. Art was not only to please the eye but to reflect harmony, order, and the divine balance between light and dark. Diplomacy was another quiet strength of the empire. In the grand halls of Persepolis, delegations from far-off lands would approach the Shahanshah bearing tribute. They brought exotic animals, rare metals, and finely worked treasures, each gift a token of allegiance. These meetings were not tense affairs. They were carefully choreographed displays of mutual respect, reinforcing the idea that Persia's rule was as much about stability as it was about dominance. Even the act of communication was elevated to an art. The imperial couriers, the Angarium, were famed for their speed. Stations placed a day's ride apart allowed fresh horses to be swapped in an instant, so a message could cross the empire faster than any merchant caravan. The phrase, "neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness of night," was said to describe their devotion to duty. And beneath all of this, the trade, the armies, the artistry, there was a shared sense of belonging. A farmer in a distant village, a merchant in Susa, a soldier stationed near the western frontier, each felt the weight of the empire's presence in their lives, not as a constant burden, but as a structure that gave order to the world. Roads were maintained, markets were safe, justice was overseen by governors appointed by the king. In a time when much of the world was divided into small kingdoms or tribes, Persia's unity was its true marvel. As the sun set over this vast empire, the hum of daily life slowed, but never completely faded. In the countryside, shepherds brought their flocks back to stone pens. In the cities, the last customers lingered at market stalls, haggling over a handful of figs or a length of cloth. And in the palaces, oil lamps flickered against the polished stone, casting shadows that seemed to dance along with the quiet music of the royal court. Persia's cities at the height of its power were not mere clusters of houses and markets. They were carefully designed works of art, each with its own rhythm, its own unique voice. From a distance, their walls rose out of the landscape like the edges of a vast tapestry. As you approached, the details emerged. Tall gates with carved stone reliefs, towers built for watchmen who could see for miles, and domes that seemed to catch the light in a way that made them glow at sunrise. The capital of Persepolis, perhaps the most renowned of them all, was unlike anything travelers had seen before. Built by Darius the Great and expanded by his successors, it was not just a political center but a ceremonial heart. Broad stairways led up to monumental terraces, their sides decorated with scenes of tribute bearers from every corner of the empire. Each step was wide and shallow, designed so that even a procession of dignitaries on horseback could ascend without haste. The message was clear. Here, time moved at the pace of dignity. The palaces themselves were feats of engineering and artistry. Tall columns carved from single pieces of stone stood in perfect alignment, their capitals shaped like the heads of bulls or lions, symbols of strength and guardianship. Roofs stretched wide, supported by these forest-like pillars, creating shaded halls that stayed cool even in the heat of summer. The floors were polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the colors of the elaborate wall hangings. Deep blues, rich reds, and threads of gold that caught the flicker of oil lamps. Beyond the grandeur of the palaces, the residential quarters had their own beauty. Streets in wealthier districts were paved with stone, lined with gardens enclosed by high walls to offer privacy. Inside these walls, courtyards served as the heart of the home. They often featured a central pool or fountain, its gentle sound masking the noise of the city beyond. Around it, rooms opened directly into the fresh air, each space arranged for the changing seasons. Shaded areas for summer, warm enclosed chambers for winter. Engineering was woven into daily life in ways that often went unnoticed by the people who benefited from it. Water channels ran through the cities, carrying fresh, cool water to fountains, baths, and gardens. In some places, public bathhouses offered both cleanliness and social connection, where people could bathe, relax, and exchange news. The cannet systems that served rural areas extended into urban centers, ensuring that water flowed even in the hottest months. Markets were carefully placed to be accessible yet distinct from residential areas, so the noise and smell of trade did not overwhelm the neighborhoods. The main bazaars were often covered with wooden or cloth awnings to shield merchants and shoppers from the sun. Narrow lanes twisted between the stalls, each turn revealing new goods: leather from the western provinces, pottery from the east, spices that perfumed the air, and baskets of fresh herbs. The scent of mint, coriander, and saffron mingled with the warm smell of fresh bread from nearby bakeries. Temples and sacred spaces were integrated into the urban landscape, not hidden away but often placed where they could be seen and reached easily. Zoroastrian fire temples stood with simple dignity, their white walls reflecting the sun, their flames tended constantly by priests in spotless robes. In these quiet spaces, the noise of the city seemed to fade, replaced by the soft crackle of the eternal fire and the low murmur of prayers. The Persians also understood the value of leisure within their cities. Public gardens, inspired by the idea of paradise, were open to citizens during festivals or royal decrees. These gardens were laid out in perfect symmetry, divided into quadrants by channels of water. Fruit trees offered shade and sweetness, while flowers, roses, lilies, jasmines, bloomed in carefully tended beds. Stone benches lined shaded paths, allowing people to rest and enjoy the scent of blossoms and the cool breeze carried by the water channels. Architecture extended beyond mere function. It was symbolic. The grand gates of the cities were often decorated with images of mythical creatures: winged bulls with human faces, lions mid-leap, to remind all who entered that they were stepping into the domain of both human and divine power. Bridges were not simply for crossing rivers. They were built with elegance, adorned with carved railings and resting spots where travelers could pause to watch the water. At night, the cities transformed. The day's heat gave way to a gentle coolness, and the streets lit up with the warm glow of oil lamps set in niches along walls. The markets that had been noisy and crowded grew quieter, with only a few vendors lingering to sell late-night snacks: roasted chickpeas, dried fruits, or flatbreads still warm from the oven. In wealthier homes, music drifted over the walls as gatherings continued into the night, while in the poorer quarters, neighbors sat outside under the stars, sharing stories in the soft night air. Persia's urban life was not accidental. Every aspect, from the flow of water to the placement of gardens, was part of a vision, a belief that the physical world should mirror the harmony of the spiritual. Cities were not merely places to live. They were reflections of the empire's ideals, where beauty and order walked hand in hand. And as dawn approached, before the markets awoke and the palaces opened their gates, the streets would fall into a deep, rare silence. Only the sound of the wind moving through the high gates remained, carrying with it the faint scent of flowers from hidden gardens and the promise of another day in the heart of Persia. In the heart of the Persian Empire, knowledge was not a luxury reserved only for kings and priests. It was a living current that moved quietly but steadily through the cities, villages, and caravan routes. The empire's vast size and cultural diversity meant that ideas traveled as freely as goods, carried in the memories of merchants, the scrolls of scribes, and the songs of traveling poets. Education in Persia often began at home. In wealthier families, children were taught to read and write from an early age, learning the cuneiform or Aramaic scripts that served as the administrative backbone of the empire. Tutors, often learned men from different corners of the realm, instructed young nobles not only in letters but in the art of speaking clearly and persuasively, a skill prized in a court where words could sway the fate of entire provinces. Alongside reading and writing came the study of numbers. Mathematics was essential for trade, taxation, and architecture, and Persian builders used precise calculations to raise columns, design gardens, and plan irrigation networks. For those destined for service in the administration, the path of learning was rigorous. They were taught the principles of law, the complex hierarchy of the satrapy system, and the traditions of diplomacy. It was said that a skilled administrator could travel to any province of the empire and immediately adapt to its customs, while still enforcing the king's law. This adaptability came from an education that blended respect for local traditions with loyalty to the central authority. Philosophy, while not formalized in the same way as in Greece, was woven into Persian thought through religion and oral tradition. Zoroastrian teachings emphasized moral responsibility, the constant choice between truth, asha, and falsehood, druj. This was more than a spiritual belief. It shaped governance, law, and personal conduct. Many Persian rulers saw themselves not simply as political leaders, but as guardians of cosmic order, responsible for maintaining balance and justice in their realm. Libraries, though rarer than in later empires, did exist in certain cities. Scrolls and clay tablets stored in these places contained records of treaties, trade agreements, agricultural yields, and astronomical observations. The Persians valued the movement of the stars for both agricultural planning and spiritual symbolism. Priests studied the heavens, marking the passage of seasons and the timing of festivals. Farmers, in turn, trusted these calculations to guide planting and harvest. Medicine, too, was part of the empire's intellectual wealth. Healers combined herbal remedies with methods learned from neighboring civilizations. From Egypt came knowledge of certain surgical techniques. From India, the use of specific spices and oils for healing. From the empire's own mountains and plains, plants whose properties had been tested over generations. Markets sold dried herbs in small cloth bundles. Thyme for the stomach, saffron for the heart, rose petals for calming the mind. Education was not limited to the upper classes. Skilled trades were passed down through apprenticeships, where a young boy might spend years in the workshop of a potter, learning to knead clay, shape vessels, and apply the colored glazes that gave Persian pottery its beauty. In weaving workshops, girls learned to spin thread, dye it with natural pigments, and create patterns that told stories in color and shape. Knowledge here was practical, tied to survival and the quiet pride of mastery. The empire's roads, while built for governance and military control, became channels for intellectual exchange. A mathematician from Babylon could find himself in Persepolis discussing numbers with a scholar from the Indus Valley. A poet from Anatolia might hear ancient Persian myths and weave them into his verses. Over shared meals and caravanserais, travelers debated the nature of the soul, the meaning of justice, or the origins of the world, their voices mingling with the crackle of the fire and the snort of camels resting outside. Even in rural areas, the influence of this intellectual culture could be felt. Seasonal festivals were occasions not only for feasting and games, but for performances, recitations of epic poetry, storytelling competitions, and the singing of historical ballads that preserved the memory of past heroes. These oral traditions were a form of collective memory, ensuring that history lived not just in stone carvings and royal decrees, but in the hearts of the people. Persia's love for beauty was inseparable from its love for knowledge. The same eye that appreciated the symmetry of a garden could see the elegance in a well-argued case or a perfectly balanced trade ledger. To the Persians, intellect and aesthetics were not separate. They were threads of the same fabric, each enhancing the other. A building's proportions were calculated with the same care as the composition of a poem. The path of water through a city mirrored the flow of an argument in court. At night, in the quieter corners of the empire, a student might sit under a lamp, copying a text onto fresh parchment, the scratch of the reed pen steady and precise. In another home, a father might tell his children the story of how Cyrus the Great united the lands, shaping the destiny of millions. And far away, in the palace, the king's scribes recorded the events of the day, their work to be read by future generations who would never see their faces. Knowledge was both the glue that held Persia together and the spark that kept it alive. It flowed through stone corridors and dusty roads alike, binding the empire's farthest reaches into a single, breathing whole. While the Persian Empire was renowned for its governance, architecture, and scholarship, it was also a place where leisure was woven naturally into the rhythm of life. To the Persians, work and duty held great value, but so did the art of rest and the shared enjoyment of the world's pleasures. Whether in the bustling cities or quiet villages, people found ways to celebrate, compete, and simply savor moments away from the demands of daily tasks. In the royal courts, leisure was as carefully curated as state affairs. The kings themselves were known to participate in hunting expeditions, not only as sport but as demonstrations of skill, courage, and command over nature. The royal hunting grounds were vast and meticulously maintained, stocked with gazelles, wild boar, and even lions in certain regions. These hunts were not chaotic chases but organized displays of coordination, involving archers on horseback, trackers on foot, and sometimes trained hunting dogs. The king's accuracy with a bow, especially from horseback, was a matter of prestige, recorded in both stone carvings and poetry. Horse riding was more than recreation. It was an art form. Noble youth were taught from an early age to ride with perfect balance, guiding their horses with subtle pressure of the legs and the gentlest movement of the reins. Equestrian games tested both rider and mount, with contests involving sharp turns, sudden stops, and firing arrows at targets while in full gallop. These skills had practical roots in warfare but evolved into respected sports, where the elegance of form mattered as much as victory. In the cities, public celebrations marked the calendar. The most famous of these was Nowruz, the Persian New Year, celebrated at the spring equinox. It was a festival of renewal, when homes were cleaned from corner to corner, new clothes were worn, and tables were set with symbolic items: sprouts for growth, sweet pastries for joy, gold coins for prosperity. The streets filled with music and laughter, jugglers and acrobats performed in the open squares, and storytellers drew crowds with tales of ancient kings and clever heroes. Music itself was an inseparable part of Persian leisure. Stringed instruments, flutes, and frame drums accompanied both public festivities and private gatherings. The melodies often followed intricate patterns, with a balance between repetition and improvisation that mirrored the Persians' love for harmony and surprise. In smaller circles, musicians might play for hours while guests reclined on cushions, sipping wine and engaging in gentle debates about poetry or philosophy. Poetry was as much a pastime as an art form. Even among those who were not professional poets, composing and reciting verses was a common skill. Friendly competitions were held where participants would respond to a given theme with quick, clever couplets. A well-placed line of verse could bring an entire room to appreciative laughter or contemplative silence. The most skilled poets were not merely entertainers but respected voices, able to shape public opinion or immortalize a moment in words that would outlive the speaker. For the common people, leisure was simpler but no less meaningful. In rural areas, wrestling matches were a popular sport, often held in open fields during seasonal festivals. These contests tested strength and technique but were also opportunities for community pride. Markets on festival days were livelier than usual, with stalls selling sweet dates, roasted nuts, and small trinkets, carved wooden toys for children, colored scarves for women, polished metalwork for men. Games involving strategy were also part of Persian leisure. Early forms of backgammon, believed to have been played in Persia, offered both amusement and intellectual challenge. Friends would gather in shaded courtyards, moving pieces across the board while discussing news from distant provinces or debating the wisdom of certain political decisions. These sessions could last well into the evening, illuminated by small oil lamps and accompanied by the slow pouring of tea or wine. Evenings in the countryside often brought quieter pleasures. Families gathered outside their homes, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread from the tandoor ovens. Children played simple games, chasing one another through the dust until the stars began to appear. Elders told stories passed down through generations, their voices steady, their words carrying a mixture of history and imagination. Laughter, applause, and the occasional gasp of surprise punctuated these nights. There was also a deep appreciation for the natural world as a source of leisure. Rivers and gardens were not only for utility but for reflection and peace. On days of rest, families might walk along shaded streams, picking wildflowers or sitting together in the grass. The imperial gardens, when opened to the public during certain celebrations, became scenes of quiet wonder. People wandered among carefully arranged flower beds, listening to the sound of water trickling through channels, feeling the cool stone underfoot. What made Persian leisure distinctive was that it rarely separated pleasure from artistry or meaning. A hunt was a test of skill. A game was a lesson in strategy. A poem was a conversation with beauty itself. Life was not divided sharply into work and rest, but flowed like a well-tended river, with moments of labor feeding into moments of celebration, and moments of celebration renewing the energy for labor. In this balance lay one of the empire's quiet strengths. A people who could find joy in the hunt, the game, the song, and the garden were a people who carried resilience within them, ready to face the demands of governance, trade, and survival, yet always keeping a place in their lives for laughter, music, and the soft light of a festival evening. Trade was the quiet heartbeat of the Persian Empire, pulsing steadily through its roads, ports, and caravan routes. The empire's vast reach, from the banks of the Indus to the shores of the Aegean, from the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of Egypt, created a network so extensive that goods, ideas, and even fashions could travel thousands of kilometers without ever leaving Persian-controlled land. The roads did not simply carry soldiers or royal messengers. They carried the prosperity and daily life of millions. At the center of this network stood the Royal Road, a marvel of engineering and organization. Stretching over 2,500 kilometers, it connected the city of Susa in the heartland to Sardis near the Aegean coast. Relay stations, known as caravanserais, were placed at regular intervals along its length, offering fresh horses for messengers, shelter for merchants, and protection for goods. These stations bustled with activity at all hours. Camels resting after long journeys, guards inspecting cargo for taxation, cooks preparing hot bread for travelers, and traders haggling over prices in a mixture of languages. The goods that flowed along these routes were astonishing in variety. From India came fine cotton fabrics, polished ivory, and exotic spices such as cardamom and cinnamon. From Central Asia arrived hardy horses, prized for their strength and stamina. Egypt sent its gold, grain, and papyrus, while the Mediterranean provinces supplied olive oil, wine, and ceramics. From the Persian heartland itself came luxury textiles, glazed pottery, and intricately worked metalware that found buyers across the empire. Markets in Persian cities were vibrant, multisensory experiences. The air was thick with the smell of grilled meats, dried fruits, and the sharp tang of vinegar from pickled vegetables. Stalls were arranged in clusters, one section for textiles, where rolls of dyed fabric hung like banners, another for spices, where merchants scooped colorful powders into small cloth bags, another for metalwork, with rows of gleaming daggers, bracelets, and bowls catching the sunlight. The art of bargaining was not simply about lowering a price. It was a social performance, a test of wit and patience. A skilled buyer might begin with exaggerated disbelief at a seller's first offer, then counter with an equally unrealistic figure, before both parties gradually approached a middle ground, all the while sharing polite compliments and occasionally sipping tea together. In this dance of negotiation, relationships mattered as much as the transaction itself. A trusted regular customer might be offered first choice of the season's best goods, while a stranger would need to prove their fairness before earning better terms. Persian coinage played a vital role in keeping trade smooth. Gold derricks and silver sigloi, stamped with the image of the king, were recognized across the empire as reliable currency. Yet barter remained common, especially in rural markets where a basket of dates might be traded for a clay jug, or a bolt of fabric exchanged for a goat. The coexistence of money and barter kept trade adaptable to the needs of each region. Caravans were the lifelines that connected distant regions. A typical caravan might consist of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of camels or mules, each carrying bundles wrapped in leather or thick cloth to protect them from dust and rain. Caravan leaders, often seasoned merchants who knew every bend of the road, coordinated the movement, ensuring that the group stayed together and reached the next station safely. At night, the caravan would set up camp in a protective circle, with a central fire for cooking and guards posted around the perimeter. The sound of low conversation, the jingle of harness bells, and the occasional call of a camel blended into the night air. Trade was not merely about goods. It was a river of culture. Languages mingled in the markets: Persian, Aramaic, Greek, Egyptian, and countless local dialects. Recipes traveled with spices, songs with instruments, and stories with their tellers. A merchant might leave home selling textiles but return not only with profit, but with a new style of weaving learned in a distant city, or a song picked up from a fellow traveler. Certain cities became known as hubs of specific trade. Babylon, already ancient by Persian times, was a center for luxury goods and intellectual exchange. Persepolis, while primarily a ceremonial capital, still hosted grand seasonal markets where foreign delegations brought tribute that blurred the line between commerce and diplomacy. Along the empire's eastern frontiers, border towns served as gateways for silk and gems coming from lands even farther east than the Persian realm itself. The empire's stability was its greatest gift to trade. Safe roads, enforced laws, and relatively fair taxation meant that merchants could take risks knowing that their ventures were protected by royal authority. Even in times when distant provinces experienced unrest, the main arteries of commerce remained remarkably secure compared to those of neighboring lands. In the smaller, quieter markets away from the capitals, trade took on a different rhythm. Farmers brought fresh vegetables, fishermen sold their morning catch, and potters offered cups and bowls still warm from the kiln. Children darted between stalls, fascinated by the bright colors and strange scents, while elders sat in shaded corners, exchanging news and gossip over cups of pomegranate juice. For the Persians, trade was not only an engine of wealth but a mirror of the empire's identity, a place where diversity met order, where the distant and the familiar stood side by side. In the hum of the market and the creak of a caravan's load, one could hear the quiet but steady pulse of an empire at its height, confident in its reach, yet grounded in the everyday exchanges that bound its people together. The Persian Empire, vast and confident, expressed its authority not only through armies and administration but through the very spaces in which its people lived, ruled, and worshipped. Architecture was more than shelter. It was a language of power, identity, and beauty, written in stone, mud brick, and wood. To walk through a Persian city during the height of the empire was to feel the weight of intention in every wall, courtyard, and column. At the pinnacle of this architectural vision stood Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire. Built under Darius I and expanded by his successors, it was not a single building but an entire complex raised upon a massive stone terrace, commanding views of the surrounding plains. The approach alone was designed to impress. A grand staircase with shallow steps allowed visiting dignitaries to ascend slowly, without breaking their dignified pace, as though the act of climbing was part of the ceremony itself. Once inside, the Apadana Hall overwhelmed visitors with its forest of columns, each rising over 20 meters high, crowned with double-headed bull capitals that symbolized strength and guardianship. Relief carvings on the walls depicted delegations from across the empire bringing tribute: gold from Lydia, textiles from India, ivory from Nubia, each figure rendered with remarkable detail in clothing and posture, a stone record of the empire's reach. While the royal palaces dazzled with scale and artistry, Persian architecture also thrived in subtler spaces. In smaller cities, the governor's residence might be fortified with thick mud brick walls, yet softened inside by courtyards lined with pomegranate trees and fountains that cooled the dry air. The interplay between defense and comfort was a recurring theme. Exteriors often projected strength, while interiors embraced light, water, and greenery. Urban homes varied by wealth and status. The houses of wealthy merchants often featured multiple courtyards, each serving a different purpose, one for receiving guests, another for family gatherings, and a smaller, private one for rest. These spaces were carefully arranged to catch the breeze and create shaded areas throughout the day. Decorative tiles, carved wooden doors, and niches for oil lamps transformed practical spaces into quiet works of art. Common homes, though simpler, followed the same principles. Even a modest dwelling might have a small open-air courtyard, where cooking could be done in summer to keep indoor spaces cool, and where children could play safely away from the dust and bustle of the street. Roofs were flat and often served as additional living space, a place to dry herbs, store goods, or sleep under the stars during warm nights. The Persians were masters of water management, and this skill shaped their architecture. In arid regions, underground canals called qanats brought fresh water from distant sources, feeding both household needs and public gardens. The sound of flowing water was not merely practical but deeply valued for its cooling effect and calming presence. In elite gardens, channels were arranged with mathematical precision, creating symmetrical reflections of the sky and trees. This design, known as chahar bagh or for gardens, divided the space into 4 quadrants, symbolizing harmony between human order and the natural world. Religious architecture blended the empire's diversity. Zoroastrian fire temples, simple in form yet spiritually significant, were built to house the sacred flame. These structures avoided excess ornamentation, focusing instead on open spaces and altars where fire could be maintained without disturbance. In regions with different traditions, older temples were often preserved or adapted, reflecting the empire's policy of respecting local beliefs while weaving them into the larger imperial fabric. Public spaces were not neglected. Covered bazaars offered protection from the sun while allowing merchants to display goods along narrow, winding corridors. Bathhouses, known in later centuries as hammams, existed in simpler forms even during the Achaemenid era, providing places for cleanliness, relaxation, and conversation. The entrances to these public buildings often bore inscriptions or reliefs that reminded citizens of the king's generosity in commissioning such works. Military architecture also bore the Persian stamp. Fortresses along the empire's frontiers were built from locally available materials, stone in the mountains, mud brick in the deserts, but always with an eye for strategic advantage. Towers allowed for wide views of approaching threats, and walls were thick enough to resist both siege engines and the relentless erosion of the elements. What made Persian architecture remarkable was its ability to merge practicality, symbolism, and beauty into a seamless whole. A palace was not just a residence but a stage for imperial ritual. A home was not just shelter but a place of airflow, light, and shared family moments. Even irrigation channels and storage buildings carried a sense of proportion and intention. This sense of proportion extended beyond the physical. To the Persians, architecture was a reflection of the empire's order. Strong foundations, harmonious layouts, and a balance between human needs and natural forces. Every column in Persepolis, every courtyard in a small village told the same story, of a people who understood that the spaces they built were as much a part of their legacy as their victories in battle or their advances in governance. And yet, architecture was only one layer of Persian daily life. To truly understand the empire's soul, one must step inside these spaces and witness the rituals, conversations, and meals that filled them. For behind every carved wall and shaded garden, there was the heartbeat of human life, the moments that transformed grand structures into living homes. Within the thick walls of a Persian home, life unfolded in patterns shaped by the climate, the seasons, and the customs of the empire. Morning began early, often before the first light of dawn had fully touched the horizon, when the air was still cool and the silence of the streets was broken only by the sound of roosters and the soft call of merchants setting up their stalls. The household would stir gradually, servants beginning their chores, older children fetching water from the nearest well or cistern, and the head of the family preparing for the day's obligations, whether in trade, farming, or government service. Breakfast was simple but nourishing. Bread, still warm from the clay oven, was the centerpiece. This flatbread, soft yet slightly crisp on the edges. Could be eaten alone or dipped in bowls of fresh yogurt mixed with herbs. Dates, figs, or pomegranate seeds might be set out, their sweetness balancing the savory flavors. In wealthier households, cheese from goat or sheep's milk added variety, along with honey collected from nearby hives. Tea, in the form we know today, was not yet a staple, but warm herbal infusions from local plants offered a comforting start to the day. The architecture of the home shaped how people lived inside it. The central courtyard was the heart of activity, a place where light fell directly from the sky, yet high walls ensured privacy. In the mornings, this space was alive with movement. Women grinding grain on stone querns, children chasing each other in the shade, and artisans in the household working on small crafts like weaving or pottery. In the heat of midday, the courtyard would become quieter, as everyone sought the cooler, shaded rooms along its edges. Meals were more than just times to eat, they were social anchors. The main meal of the day often came in the late afternoon, when shadows began to lengthen and the heat eased. This was when stews simmered in clay pots would be ladled into bowls, the rich scents of lamb, chickpeas, onions, and coriander rising in the air. Flatbread doubled as both utensil and plate, used to scoop up tender morsels and soak in the broth. Dishes were shared communally, placed in the center for everyone to take from, reinforcing the sense of family unity. For wealthier homes, meals could be elaborate affairs. Platters might hold roasted fowl glazed with pomegranate syrup, or rice seasoned with saffron and garnished with dried fruits. Wine, produced in various regions of the empire, flowed in carved goblets for the adults, while children drank diluted fruit juices. Musicians might be invited to play during these gatherings, filling the air with the steady pluck of a lute or the soft beat of a hand drum. The division of labor in the household was well established but flexible. Men often worked outside the home, in markets, workshops, or fields, while women managed the domestic sphere, overseeing cooking, textile production, and the care of children. Yet women could also be active in trade, especially in textile sales, and in some cases managed property in their own right. Elders, whether male or female, were respected voices in family decisions, and their counsel shaped both household affairs and the marriages or alliances formed between families. Children's lives were a blend of work and play. Even from a young age, they were expected to contribute, carrying small loads, assisting in the kitchen, or tending to animals. But there was also time for games, many of which involved simple objects like carved sticks, knucklebones, or woven balls. Storytelling was a favorite pastime, with tales of ancient kings, cunning heroes, and moral lessons passed down from parent to child. These stories often contained echoes of the empire's own history, subtly reinforcing the values of loyalty, honor, and hospitality. One of the quieter yet most important aspects of domestic life was hospitality. It was considered a duty and a point of pride to welcome guests warmly, whether they were neighbors, traveling relatives, or complete strangers in need of shelter. Visitors were offered food and drink immediately, and conversation began only after the guest was comfortable. This tradition extended across social classes, a cultural glue that helped bind together such a vast and diverse empire. Religious practice in the home varied depending on the family's beliefs. For Zoroastrians, the household hearth often served as a symbolic flame, kept clean and tended with care. Offerings of bread, milk, or flowers might be made in small, quiet moments. In homes following other faiths within the empire, prayer spaces could be as simple as a niche in the wall or as elaborate as a private altar. Evenings carried a different rhythm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, rooftops became gathering places. Families might bring up mats and cushions, spreading them out to catch the cool night air. Here, under a dome of stars unspoiled by artificial light, conversations wandered from the events of the day to plans for tomorrow. In wealthier districts, one might hear distant music or the faint laughter of gatherings in nearby courtyards. In rural villages, the night was punctuated by the rustle of palm fronds, the calls of night birds, and the occasional bark of a dog. Life inside a Persian home was a balance of routine and adaptability. The same walls that sheltered daily chores also hosted moments of celebration, grief, and change. Seasons shifted, children grew, elders passed on, and yet the rhythm of domestic life, shaped by food, work, relationships, and tradition, continued, a constant thread woven through the grand tapestry of the empire's history. Festivals in the Persian Empire were more than mere occasions for amusement. They were woven into the very fabric of daily life, marking the passage of time, the cycles of nature, and the rhythms of society. These celebrations were moments when the empire's diversity and unity converged, allowing individuals from distant regions to participate in shared customs while maintaining their local traditions. The most celebrated of these was Nowruz, the Persian New Year, observed at the spring equinox. It was a festival of renewal and reflection, when homes were thoroughly cleaned, symbolizing the sweeping away of past troubles. Fresh clothes were worn, representing the renewal of life, and tables were set with 7 symbolic items, each chosen to reflect an aspect of prosperity, health, or happiness. Sprouts for growth, coins for wealth, apples for beauty, and candles to chase away darkness created a tableau of hope and aspiration. During Nowruz, streets came alive. Merchants brought bright textiles and fragrant spices to market squares. Children ran through the crowds, carrying small bundles of flowers, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic beats of drums and the pluck of stringed instruments. Storytellers recited epic tales and moral fables, capturing the attention of young and old alike. In wealthier neighborhoods, courtyards were open to the public, with fountains flowing and gardens arranged in the precise Chahar Bagh pattern, allowing families to wander, reflect, and socialize. Other festivals marked the cycles of agriculture and the movements of the sun. Harvest time was an occasion for communal labor followed by shared feasts. Villagers brought in wheat, barley, and fruits, and once the work was done, tables were laden with freshly baked bread, roasted meats, and dishes enriched with herbs and spices. Music accompanied the festivities. Simple flutes and drums played melodies that echoed across fields, while dancers moved in circles, often reflecting ancient forms passed down through generations. Religious ceremonies also punctuated the year. Zoroastrian fire temples, often located near towns or at strategic high points, hosted rituals in which priests tended eternal flames, offering prayers on behalf of the community. Lay people could participate indirectly, leaving offerings of bread, milk, or flowers, or gathering outside to witness processions and chants. These ceremonies were solemn but carried a rhythm that connected everyday life to the cosmos, a reminder that humans were part of a larger order. In smaller communities, festivals were intimate yet no less significant. Weddings, coming-of-age ceremonies, and family dedications provided occasions for neighbors to gather, exchanging gifts of cloth, jewelry, and small tokens of food. Even in these private events, the sense of artistry was present. Tables were arranged meticulously, meals prepared with care, and music and dance incorporated into the proceedings. The repetition of these rituals year after year reinforced the bonds between families and their communities. Markets adapted to festival life as well. Temporary stalls appeared to meet increased demand for gifts, decorations, and specialty foods. Sellers of nuts and dried fruits presented their goods in patterned baskets. Spice vendors combined flavors into festive blends. Potters displayed bowls and plates painted with symbolic motifs, ready to be gifted or used in celebrations. Haggling remained a central activity, yet it was accompanied by shared laughter and conversation, as traders and buyers recognized the heightened importance of community in these moments. Even the roads themselves participated in festival life. Caravan routes saw increased traffic as merchants traveled to supply distant towns with goods for celebrations. Travelers shared stories and songs along the way, creating a sense of anticipation for the gatherings ahead. Inns and caravanserais bustled with energy, as families reunited and traders exchanged news alongside their merchandise. Entertainment during these festivals ranged from athletic contests to theatrical performances. Wrestling matches, archery demonstrations, and horse races were common in both rural and urban settings. In some towns, puppet shows or dramatizations of historical events offered moral lessons while amusing crowds. Poetry competitions challenged participants to compose clever, evocative verses on the spot, rewarding skill with admiration and sometimes with small gifts. Food and drink were central to the experience. Platters of roasted lamb, chicken, or fish shared the table with seasoned rice, fresh vegetables, and pastries sweetened with honey or fruit syrups. Herbs such as coriander, dill, and mint enhanced the dishes, while pomegranates, dates, and figs provided both color and flavor. In wealthier households, wine or fermented fruit juices were served, accompanied by discussions of philosophy, poetry, or news from distant lands. Nightfall transformed festival scenes. Streets, courtyards, and gardens glowed with the warm light of oil lamps and torches. Music softened, and the air filled with the scent of incense, flowers, and cooked foods. Families gathered to recount the day's events, recount stories of heroes, and pass down wisdom to children who would remember these moments for the rest of their lives. Festivals were thus both a reflection and a reinforcement of the Persian worldview. They celebrated the cycles of nature, the achievements of humanity, and the structure of society itself. Through ritual, music, food, and communal activity, the people of Persia experienced the empire not only as a political entity, but as a living, breathing culture, one in which the rhythms of work and leisure, labor and celebration, coexisted in harmony. Food in the Persian Empire was never simply about sustenance. It was a reflection of culture, geography, and social structure. From the bustling streets of Susa to the quiet villages along the Zagros Mountains, the smells, colors, and textures of meals shaped daily life and connected people to both the land and each other. The empire's vastness meant that ingredients came from diverse regions, creating a cuisine as varied as the cultures it encompassed. Breakfast was modest but hearty, designed to fuel the day. Bread, often flat and baked in clay ovens, was a staple. Freshly baked in the morning, it was sometimes sprinkled with sesame seeds or lightly salted. Alongside the bread, families would eat dried fruits like figs, dates, or apricots, occasionally mixed with crushed nuts for additional texture and flavor. Dairy products, such as fresh yogurt or soft cheese made from goat or sheep milk, added richness and protein, while herbs like mint, coriander, or dill enhanced the flavors. Warm herbal infusions, brewed from plants grown in household gardens or nearby fields, were consumed for both taste and gentle medicinal benefit. Lunch, though often lighter than the main meal, was varied depending on the season and the household's wealth. Seasonal vegetables, onions, leeks, cucumbers, or legumes were commonly prepared with olive oil and herbs. Stews combining lentils, chickpeas, or beans with small amounts of meat provided both nourishment and flavor, while grains like barley or wheat accompanied nearly every dish. In some regions, small fish or freshwater crustaceans were added to meals, offering protein from local rivers and streams. The main meal of the day usually took place in the late afternoon or early evening. This meal reflected the family's status, wealth, and access to resources. In wealthier households, dishes could be elaborate, combining meats such as lamb, poultry, or even game hunted from nearby forests with fruits, nuts, and aromatic spices. Pomegranate juice, grape syrup, and honey were commonly used to glaze meats or sweeten stews, creating complex layers of flavor. Rice, a prized import from the eastern provinces, was often cooked with saffron, lending a golden hue and delicate aroma, or mixed with dried fruits and nuts for celebratory meals. Markets supplied the empire with ingredients both local and exotic. Spices from India and Arabia, such as cinnamon, cardamom, and cumin, were treasured not only for their taste but for their prestige. Traders brought these goods along caravan routes, ensuring that even distant towns could access the flavors that connected them to the empire at large. Salt, essential for preserving foods and enhancing flavor, came from mines and coastal regions, while honey was collected from wild hives and carefully stored in clay jars. Cooking techniques varied widely, often reflecting both practicality and artistry. Roasting over open flames was common for meats, especially during communal gatherings or hunts. Boiling and stewing allowed flavors to meld, creating aromatic dishes that could be shared among many people. Baking in clay ovens, both in homes and in public spaces, produced breads and pastries that were crisp on the outside and soft inside, often eaten hot from the oven. Even simple meals were approached with care, attention to texture, balance, and presentation. The dining experience was communal, emphasizing shared enjoyment. Food was often placed in the center of a low table or directly on a mat in the courtyard, allowing each person to take what they wished with bread or fingers. This practice fostered a sense of equality and connection, reinforcing family bonds and community ties. Conversations during meals ranged from daily events to philosophical discussions, poetry recitations, or recounting of historical tales. Meals were as much about intellectual and emotional nourishment as they were about physical sustenance. Seasonal changes shaped the diet as well. Spring brought fresh greens, tender shoots, and herbs, often eaten raw or lightly cooked. Summer offered fruits such as melons, grapes, and plums, enjoyed fresh or dried for storage. Autumn was the season for harvest foods, grains, legumes, and root vegetables, alongside nuts and preserved fruits. Winter relied on stored provisions, including dried legumes, salted meats, and fermented foods, which provided warmth and sustenance during the colder months. Even in modest households, culinary traditions were rich. Simple stews made from lentils or beans, seasoned with herbs, offered nourishment and flavor. Flatbreads served as both plate and utensil, while pickled vegetables and dried fruits added variety. Herbs and spices, often grown in small garden plots, allowed families to season their food creatively, demonstrating resourcefulness and care. Persian cuisine reflected not only the empire's wealth and diversity, but also its philosophy of balance and harmony. Sweet, sour, salty, and bitter elements were combined thoughtfully, mirroring the empire's broader aesthetic values. Meals were an art, a ritual, and a daily celebration of life's abundance, connecting individuals to the land, to each other, and to the enduring legacy of Persia. In the Persian Empire, clothing was far more than protection from the elements. It was a statement of identity, status, and cultural values. The vast empire encompassed diverse climates and peoples, and its fashion reflected both practicality and artistry, blending textiles, colors, and adornments into a visual language that communicated wealth, profession, and even allegiance to the king. The materials used in Persian clothing varied depending on region and social class. Wealthy individuals favored fine wools, silks imported from India or China, and linens spun from flax grown along the rivers. These fabrics were often dyed in vivid colors, deep blues, rich reds, and golden yellows, achieved using natural dyes extracted from plants, minerals, and insects. Patterns and embroidery adorned garments, ranging from geometric motifs to intricate depictions of flowers, animals, and mythical symbols. Such decoration was not purely ornamental. It signaled social standing, trade connections, and sometimes even family lineage. The style of clothing was designed with both comfort and climate in mind. In the warmer lowlands, loose-fitting tunics and trousers allowed airflow and ease of movement, while long sleeves and high collars provided modesty and protection from the sun. In cooler mountainous regions, layered garments of wool or fur kept the body insulated. Cloaks, scarves, and shawls could be added or removed as temperatures shifted, demonstrating a practical adaptability that complemented the empire's aesthetic sensibilities. Royal attire was particularly striking. Kings and high-ranking officials wore long, flowing robes often embroidered with gold thread and precious stones. The patterns on these garments were deliberate, often depicting lions, griffins, or sun motifs, symbolizing strength, authority, and divine favor. A royal belt or sash not only secured the robes but served as a sign of rank. Crowns and headdresses varied by occasion, from ceremonial tiaras adorned with jewels to simpler hats for daily governance, each carefully designed to reflect the wearer's power and prestige. Accessories played an equally important role. Belts, bracelets, and necklaces were crafted from metals, stones, and beads, and they often carried symbolic meaning. Rings could signify office or loyalty to a particular noble house, while amulets were believed to provide protection against misfortune. Shoes, often soft and pointed, were made of leather and sometimes embroidered, providing both functionality and elegance. Even everyday workers or merchants paid attention to footwear, as proper shoes ensured comfort during long hours spent in markets or fields. Men's and women's clothing differed but shared common aesthetic principles. Men typically wore tunics and trousers, sometimes accompanied by a cloak or overcoat. Women's garments often involved multiple layers, with long robes over fitted underdresses, accompanied by scarves or veils that could cover the head and shoulders. Wealthier women's robes were brightly colored and intricately embroidered, while simpler fabrics were used by those in rural areas. Jewelry, woven belts, and decorated shoes enhanced the ensemble, adding visual richness and expressing personal taste. Children's clothing mirrored adult styles, adjusted for size and practicality. Young boys might wear small tunics and trousers, while girls wore simpler robes with bright sashes or ribbons. Both boys and girls were encouraged to wear clothing that allowed freedom of movement, whether for play, learning, or participation in family chores. Special garments were reserved for festivals and ceremonies, often featuring vibrant colors and decorative stitching that reflected the importance of the occasion. Seasonal changes influenced not only materials but also colors and layers. Light-colored linens and silks were favored in summer to reflect heat, while darker wools and furs provided warmth in winter. The empire's extensive trade networks allowed dyes and fabrics from distant lands to be incorporated, creating a dynamic fashion culture that was constantly evolving yet rooted in tradition. Clothing also functioned as a subtle marker of occupation or social role. Priests and religious officials wore distinct garments to signify their office, often in subdued colors with minimal ornamentation, emphasizing purity and focus. Soldiers and guards wore practical tunics reinforced with leather or metal elements, allowing freedom of movement while providing protection. Merchants, scholars, and artisans each developed recognizable attire, blending practicality with visual cues that communicated their identity to others in the community. Beyond practicality and status, Persian fashion carried philosophical undertones. Balance, harmony, and proportion were valued, reflected in how layers, patterns, and colors were combined. A well-dressed individual demonstrated not only taste but awareness of social norms, cultural heritage, and personal discipline. Clothing was a form of silent communication, a way to navigate the complex web of hierarchy, etiquette, and interpersonal relations that structured daily life in the empire. In essence, attire in Persia was a living language. Every fold of fabric, every embroidered motif, every carefully chosen accessory told a story of the wearer's place in society, their wealth, their profession, and even their aspirations. Through clothing, the empire's vast diversity was expressed in vivid color and form, creating a visual tapestry as intricate and ordered as the architecture, markets, and ceremonies that shaped Persian life. In the Persian Empire, education was not merely a private endeavor. It was a cornerstone of civic life, a tool that shaped individuals to contribute to the empire's vast bureaucracy, trade networks, and cultural continuity. From the bustling cities to quiet villages, learning took place in diverse forms, reflecting the empire's complexity and the multiplicity of social roles its citizens could assume. Formal education was often reserved for the children of the elite. Boys from noble or wealthy families learned to read and write Aramaic or Old Persian, the lingua franca of administration, as well as other local languages spoken across the empire. They were instructed in arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, essential skills for managing estates, calculating taxes, or navigating the empire's roads and waterways. Lessons often took place in small classrooms or in the courtyards of private homes, where teachers, often accomplished scribes or scholars, would recite texts aloud while students practiced writing on wax tablets or parchment. Girls, particularly in wealthy households, received instruction as well, though their focus was often on literacy, practical skills, and arts that would prepare them for managing a household. They learned to weave, embroider, and cook sophisticated dishes, but they were also exposed to poetry, moral lessons, and religious teachings. Education for girls was considered vital for the continuation of family traditions, social propriety, and the cultivation of refined sensibilities. Scribes were among the most respected figures in Persian society. Mastery of writing was not merely technical. It was an art form. The careful formation of cuneiform or alphabetic characters on clay tablets, parchment, or papyrus required patience, precision, and creativity. Scribes recorded laws, treaties, trade transactions, and royal decrees, ensuring the empire's machinery functioned smoothly. Apprenticeship under a skilled scribe could last years, as students absorbed not only literacy but numeracy, record-keeping techniques, and even elements of storytelling to convey ideas clearly. Beyond formal education, much learning occurred informally through observation, mentorship, and practice. Children in rural areas absorbed agricultural knowledge by working alongside parents in fields and orchards, learning which seeds produce the best yield, how to interpret weather patterns, and how to maintain irrigation systems. Young artisans apprenticed under master craftsmen, gradually acquiring the technical skill and aesthetic judgment required to create pottery, metalwork, textiles, or jewelry. Knowledge passed this way was tactile, experiential, and deeply tied to the land and the community. Libraries and repositories, particularly in major cities, held scrolls, clay tablets, and codices that contained texts on history, law, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Scholars would gather in these spaces to study, debate, and preserve knowledge. Astronomy was especially revered. Persian astronomers meticulously observed the stars, planets, and solstices, using their findings to create calendars, predict seasonal changes, and advise agricultural and ceremonial planning. Mathematics, too, had practical applications, from constructing palaces to calculating tribute and trade accounts. Storytelling played a critical role in education across all classes. Tales of legendary kings, heroes, and moral dilemmas were passed orally in markets, courtyards, and homes. These narratives imparted ethical lessons, reinforced cultural values, and nurtured imagination. Children learned early that stories were not merely entertainment. They were vessels of history, wisdom, and social cohesion. Religious instruction was equally important. Zoroastrian teachings, which emphasized truth, duty, and the cosmic struggle between order and chaos, were integrated into daily life. Children learned prayers, rituals, and the moral codes that guided behavior. In households where multiple faiths coexisted, exposure to different religious traditions fostered respect and understanding, preparing individuals to navigate the empire's diverse social landscape. Travel itself was a form of education. Merchants, diplomats, and officials moving along the royal road or distant caravan routes absorbed languages, customs, and practical knowledge from every province. Exposure to different diets, clothing styles, architectural techniques, and political arrangements expanded their understanding of the empire and the broader world. Such experiences were invaluable, shaping not only practical skills, but also the cultural literacy required to maintain the empire's cohesion. Persian education balanced theory and practice. Mathematics and astronomy informed construction and agriculture. Writing and rhetoric supported governance and trade. Music, poetry, and art nurtured refinement and cultural continuity. Learning was woven seamlessly into daily life, from the structured classrooms of elite boys to the fields, workshops, and homes where children observed, experimented, and contributed. Ultimately, knowledge in Persia was a bridge between generations, linking the practicalities of survival to the ideals of civilization. Through formal instruction, apprenticeship, storytelling, and travel, Persians cultivated a society that valued wisdom as much as power, skill as much as heritage, and learning as much as tradition. The empire's grandeur was not only in its architecture or armies, but in the minds it nurtured, capable of sustaining a civilization that stretched from the Indus to the Aegean. Life in Persia, while structured by duties, education, and ritual, was punctuated by rich forms of entertainment that brought people together, celebrated achievements, and offered moments of joy. Music, dance, and performance were integral to both private and public life, filling homes, courtyards, and palace halls with rhythm, melody, and movement. Music was omnipresent in Persian culture, from the bustling markets to the serene gardens of the elite. Simple instruments such as flutes, lyres, and small drums accompanied street performers and family gatherings, while larger ensembles played at festivals and royal ceremonies. Each instrument carried a distinct voice. The lyre's soft pluck resonated with poetic storytelling. Drums maintained the pulse of dance and celebration, and flutes mimicked the natural sounds of birds and wind, blending human artistry with the rhythms of the environment. Dance complemented music, providing both entertainment and ritual expression. In village squares, people formed circles or lines, moving in coordinated steps to celebrate harvests, weddings, and seasonal festivals. Movements could be vigorous, displaying skill and endurance, or gentle and flowing, reflecting ceremonial reverence. In royal courts, dancers performed with greater elaboration, often accompanied by musicians playing intricate compositions, their gestures and formations symbolizing stories of legendary heroes or the divine order of the cosmos. Storytelling remained a central form of entertainment, bridging generations and social classes. Minstrels and bards recounted epic tales, sometimes accompanying their words with music, acting, or visual aids. These narratives immortalized kings, warriors, and moral exemplars, teaching lessons while captivating listeners. In marketplaces, courtyards, and palace halls, storytellers were highly valued, their craft honed through memorization, performance, and subtle improvisation. Even children engaged with these stories, learning history, ethics, and imaginative thinking through repeated retellings. Games and athletic contests were also popular. Wrestling matches, archery challenges, and horseback riding competitions showcased strength, precision, and courage, often attracting spectators from surrounding communities. In urban areas, board games such as strategy-based or counting games were enjoyed in shaded courtyards or market alcoves, fostering both entertainment and intellectual challenge. Outdoor games, often involving running, ball play, or mock battles, allowed children and adults alike to practice agility and skill while enjoying social interaction. Theatrical performances existed in varied forms, from impromptu street dramatizations to more structured court entertainments. Plays often depicted historical events, heroic exploits, or moral parables. Costumes, masks, and props enhanced the storytelling, transforming simple spaces into immersive stages. Performances were interactive, audiences laughed, gasped, and occasionally participated, creating a dynamic cultural exchange that reinforced community bonds. Public spaces were central to entertainment. Bazaars were not only centers of trade but hubs of cultural activity, where musicians, acrobats, and storytellers performed for passers-by. Courtyards in homes and palaces became stages for family celebrations, weddings, and religious observances. Gardens, designed with flowing water, symmetrical layouts, and shaded walkways, provided tranquil spaces for contemplation and leisure, where music and conversation flowed alongside the murmuring fountains. Food, too, played a role in entertainment. Feasts were occasions for indulgence, showcasing culinary artistry alongside music and dance. Platters of roasted meats, aromatic stews, and delicate pastries were served in abundance, often accompanied by fermented grape juice or other local beverages. Guests were expected to engage not only with the food, but with conversation, storytelling, and occasionally games, turning dining into a multisensory cultural experience. Entertainment reflected the social hierarchy while also uniting people across status lines. Festivals allowed for shared enjoyment, where nobles, merchants, and peasants could experience music, dance, and storytelling together, albeit in subtly different spaces or roles. Even within private homes, entertainment reinforced relationships, offering both relaxation and education, as songs, dances, and tales conveyed moral, historical, and cultural lessons. Importantly, Persian entertainment emphasized harmony and balance, echoing broader cultural values. Music was structured with scales and patterns that mirrored natural rhythms. Dances blended precision and fluidity. Performances respected timing, space, and audience engagement. Through entertainment, Persians cultivated not only joy but refinement, reinforcing social cohesion while celebrating human creativity and expression. Nightfall often marked the continuation of these cultural practices. Courtyards glowed with the soft flicker of lamps, and the air carried the blended scents of incense, food, and flowering gardens. Families and neighbors gathered to enjoy music, recite poetry, or play games beneath the stars, creating a sense of intimacy and connection that persisted regardless of wealth or status. Even after the formal celebrations ended, the sounds of laughter, storytelling, and quiet music lingered, embedding rhythm and melody into the daily life of the empire. Entertainment in Persia was thus inseparable from identity, education, and social structure. It provided a stage for artistic expression, a medium for transmitting knowledge, and a space for communal bonding. In every melody, dance, or tale, the values, history, and imagination of the empire came alive, reminding its people that life, even amid duty and discipline, was meant to be experienced fully, with attention to beauty, skill, and shared joy. Trade in the Persian Empire was not just an economic activity. It was a defining feature of daily life, linking distant regions, shaping culture, and fostering prosperity. From the sun-baked streets of Persepolis to the bustling ports on the Persian Gulf, commerce pulsed through the empire, touching every household, marketplace, and village. The exchange of goods was a complex network, balancing local production, long-distance trade, and the movement of luxury items coveted across continents. The empire's roads were its veins. The Royal Road, stretching over 2,000 miles from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east, allowed merchants, messengers, and officials to traverse vast distances with surprising efficiency. Caravanserais dotted these routes at regular intervals, providing shelter, food, and water for travelers and their animals. Inns and rest stops were not only practical but social centers, where news, gossip, and ideas flowed alongside commodities. Traders might pause for days, exchanging information, repairing goods, and preparing for the next leg of their journey. Markets were the visible face of commerce in daily life. Urban centers thrived around bazaars, which were labyrinthine corridors of shops and stalls offering spices, textiles, pottery, metals, and imported luxury goods. In the mornings, merchants unrolled carpets and displayed vibrant fabrics dyed in reds, blues, and yellows, while perfumers set out jars of fragrant oils, adders, and incense. Spices were displayed in mounds, their aroma mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread and roasting meats, drawing in passers-by with a sensory richness that made shopping both necessity and pleasure. Trade extended far beyond Persia's borders. Caravans brought silk from China, spices from India, ivory and gold from Africa, and exotic animals from Arabia and Central Asia. Each item told a story. The silk thread traced to a distant river valley, the spice harvested by skilled hands under tropical sun, the gemstone cut and polished by artisans hundreds of miles away. Persian merchants were adept negotiators, using both skill and reputation to secure favorable terms, and often relied on letters of credit or promissory notes to facilitate transactions across long distances. Local commerce was equally vital. Rural villages produced grains, fruits, vegetables, and livestock, which were transported to nearby towns for sale or barter. Farmers, shepherds, and artisans engaged in seasonal exchanges, trading surplus goods for items they could not produce themselves, such as pottery, metal tools, or textiles. This constant circulation of goods reinforced community interdependence, while also connecting even remote settlements to the empire's broader economic web. The role of currency was central to the flow of trade. The Persian daric, a gold coin, alongside silver and bronze denominations, provided a standardized medium that simplified exchange. Coins bore images of kings, divine symbols, or inscriptions, reflecting both authority and cultural identity. Market transactions often combined coinage with barter, particularly in rural areas, illustrating a flexible system responsive to local needs and resources. Merchants often traveled in caravans for safety and efficiency, accompanied by camels, donkeys, and pack animals trained to carry heavy loads across deserts, mountains, and rivers. These caravans were microcosms of Persian society, with guides, guards, and traders sharing meals, storytelling, and songs along the way. Each journey was fraught with challenges, weather extremes, bandits, and difficult terrain, Yet the rewards of commerce made the risks worthwhile, sustaining livelihoods and linking communities across vast distances. Markets were also centers of cultural exchange. Alongside goods, merchants brought knowledge, fashion trends, artistic motifs, and religious ideas. A woven pattern from the East could inspire local textile designs. A medicinal herb from Arabia could change culinary or healing practices, and news of distant events traveled faster than armies, shaping public awareness and imagination. In this way, commerce was inseparable from culture, feeding both the body and the mind of the empire. Festivals and public events were amplified by commerce. During Nowruz or harvest celebrations, markets swelled with temporary stalls, exotic foods, and decorative items. Families visited in anticipation, buying special garments, spices, or gifts. Artisans prepared seasonal wares, and street performers entertained shoppers, turning commerce into a multisensory, culturally rich experience. Even ordinary transactions were imbued with artistry, whether in the careful wrapping of spices or the arrangement of fruits in colorful displays. Through commerce, ordinary people engaged with the broader world. A farmer selling wheat in a provincial town could witness fabrics from India, spices from Arabia, and metalwork from Anatolia. A child observing a merchant's weighing scale learned the principles of measurement and trade. Commerce was education, entertainment, and livelihood simultaneously, shaping both material life and social awareness. Ultimately, trade was the lifeblood of Persia. It sustained cities, funded armies, supported artisans, and enriched households. It allowed ideas, goods, and cultures to mingle, creating a dynamic, interconnected society. From the hum of markets to the rhythm of caravans on distant roads, commerce defined how Persians lived, celebrated, and perceived their place in the world, forming a web that extended across continents, yet touched every home, field, and family in the empire. The Persian Empire was not only remarkable for its wealth, culture, and governance, but also for the extraordinary vision of its urban spaces. Cities, palaces, and public structures were meticulously planned to reflect order, beauty, and power, combining functionality with artistry in ways that impressed both citizens and visitors alike. Persian urban planning was intentional and hierarchical. Capitals like Persepolis or Susa were designed as centers of administration, culture, and ritual, with grand avenues, ceremonial halls, and organized neighborhoods. Streets were often laid out in grids or radiating patterns, providing easy access to markets, temples, administrative offices, and residential quarters. Open spaces and courtyards allowed for communal gatherings, ceremonies, and daily social interaction, fostering a sense of cohesion and belonging within the urban fabric. Palaces were the apex of architectural achievement. These structures were not only homes for royalty but also stages for political power and ceremonial grandeur. Massive stone columns supported intricate roofs, while walls were adorned with carved reliefs depicting kings, mythical creatures, and scenes of conquest. Courtyards with flowing water, shaded colonnades, and meticulously arranged gardens reflected the Persian ideal of harmony between human design and nature. The sound of fountains and trickling water enhanced the sense of tranquility and refinement, creating spaces that were as much about contemplation as about display. Residential areas varied according to social status. Wealthier citizens lived in homes with multiple rooms arranged around private courtyards, often with small gardens, storage areas, and separate kitchens. Decorative tiles, painted walls, and wooden lattices provided both aesthetic beauty and ventilation. In more modest neighborhoods, homes were simpler, built from mud bricks or stone, yet still designed to accommodate family life, community interaction, and protection from the elements. Narrow alleys and communal spaces ensured that even small homes were integrated into the rhythm of the city. Public buildings were essential to civic life. Temples, ziggurats, and fire altars were prominent in city centers, designed to honor the divine and facilitate religious practice. Administrative offices, archives, and audience halls ensured efficient governance, while bazaars and caravanserais accommodated commerce and travel. Bridges, aqueducts, and irrigation systems demonstrated engineering prowess, enabling the movement of people, goods, and water across challenging landscapes. These structures were not only practical but symbolic, illustrating the empire's capacity to harness both nature and human labor in service of order and prosperity. Gardens were a defining feature of Persian architecture, embodying the philosophical and aesthetic ideals of the empire. The Chaharbagh, or four-part garden, divided spaces into quadrants with water channels, reflecting symmetry, abundance, and cosmic order. Fruit trees, flowering shrubs, and herb beds provided both sustenance and sensory delight. Walkways and benches invited residents to pause, converse, or contemplate, making gardens integral to both leisure and intellectual life. The presence of water, often flowing through channels and pools, symbolized life, purity, and renewal, harmonizing with the empire's broader cultural and spiritual values. Construction techniques demonstrated both innovation and adaptability. Stone, mud brick, and timber were combined with plaster, stucco, and decorative tiles to create durable yet ornate structures. Roofs were sometimes flat, other times vaulted or domed, depending on climate, function, and status. Columns, pilasters, and arches were employed not merely for support, but for visual rhythm, guiding the eye and enhancing the perception of space. Reliefs, frescoes, and inscriptions added narrative and symbolic layers, transforming walls into storytellers of empire, mythology, and moral ideals. Infrastructure extended beyond cities. Roads connected urban centers to villages, ports, and frontier regions, ensuring the flow of goods, information, and armies. Irrigation canals, aqueducts, and reservoirs supported agriculture, demonstrating an understanding of engineering and resource management critical to sustaining urban populations. Bridges and causeways overcame natural obstacles, often designed with aesthetic consideration as well as utility, becoming landmarks that embodied both human ingenuity and imperial authority. Every space, from grand halls to narrow alleys, was designed with attention to light, airflow, and human activity. Open courtyards and gardens moderated the harsh sun, while covered walkways provided shelter from rain or heat. Public squares allowed for markets, festivals, and gatherings, creating layers of communal interaction woven into the urban fabric. Architecture thus mediated daily life, influencing social behavior, cultural expression, and the rhythm of work, leisure, and ceremony. Persian cities were living organisms, integrating human needs with artistic vision. Palaces, homes, gardens, markets, and temples reflected the empire's values: order, beauty, harmony, and connection to nature. They allowed citizens to experience both functionality and aesthetic pleasure, embedding art, ritual, and practicality into every corner of urban life. From the soaring columns of Persepolis to the bustling streets of provincial towns, architecture shaped not only space but experience, creating environments that were at once practical, symbolic, and inspiring. Religion in the Persian Empire was more than ritual. It was a framework guiding ethics, governance, and daily life, intertwining the spiritual with the practical, shaping how individuals understood their place in the world. Zoroastrianism, the dominant faith, emphasized the cosmic struggle between order, asha, and chaos, druj, teaching moral responsibility, truthfulness, and respect for nature. Its influence permeated homes, markets, schools, and palaces, leaving an imprint on every facet of society. Daily routines were deeply informed by religious principles. From dawn, citizens observed practices that aligned with purity and respect for the divine. Morning rituals often included washing and reciting prayers to honor Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity, while also invoking blessings for the day. Fire, representing light, truth, and divine presence, was central. Households maintained small fires or lamps, and community fire temples became sites for communal worship, guidance, and reflection. Even in modest homes, care was taken to avoid contaminating fire, water, or earth, reflecting the Zoroastrian emphasis on maintaining harmony with the natural world. Festivals and holy days punctuated the calendar, structuring both agricultural and civic life. Nowruz, the Persian New Year, celebrated the arrival of spring renewal, and the triumph of light over darkness. Families cleaned their homes, prepared symbolic foods, and exchanged gifts, while public celebrations involved music, dancing, and communal feasts. Seasonal rituals marked planting and harvest, integrating spirituality with practical concerns, ensuring that agriculture, economy, and faith were interwoven. Priests, or magi, were essential intermediaries between the divine and society. Educated in sacred texts, ritual procedures, and astrology, they performed ceremonies at fire temples, advised rulers on religious and ethical matters, and instructed the young in moral precepts. Their role extended beyond ritual, influencing law, education, and governance. Priests maintained sacred records, performed divination, and provided guidance during both private dilemmas and public crises, creating a structured interface between human action and cosmic order. Ethical principles were embedded in everyday behavior. Zoroastrianism emphasized honesty, hospitality, charity, and the careful treatment of natural resources. Merchants conducted transactions with integrity, farmers tended land responsibly, and families nurtured children with stories of moral courage and duty. Acts of generosity, whether providing food to travelers or sharing resources with neighbors, were seen as reinforcing Asha, the natural and divine order, creating social cohesion and ethical awareness throughout the empire. Religious architecture was both symbolic and functional. Fire temples were constructed with careful attention to orientation, ventilation, and light, creating sanctuaries that honored sacred fire while allowing communal participation. Courtyards facilitated gatherings, water channels reflected ritual purity, and raised altars ensured the fire remained central. Temples became focal points for learning, socialization, and guidance, linking spiritual practice to civic identity and community engagement. Pilgrimage and travel were also embedded in religious life. Devotees journeyed to sacred sites for festivals, rituals, or personal reflection, traversing roads that connected distant provinces. Such journeys reinforced imperial cohesion, as citizens from diverse regions encountered each other, shared practices, and reinforced shared beliefs, weaving faith into the social and cultural fabric of the empire. Religious festivals were immersive experiences, blending sensory, social, and spiritual elements. Music, dance, poetry, and feasting accompanied ritual observances, making faith tangible and memorable. Participants wore symbolic colors, prepared ceremonial foods, and recited sacred texts, all while interacting with neighbors, family, and community members. The festivities celebrated cosmic order, human responsibility, and communal bonds simultaneously, reinforcing both personal and collective identity. Zoroastrianism also influenced legal and administrative frameworks. Law was understood not merely as social contract but as an extension of moral order, with honesty, fairness, and duty emphasized in judicial proceedings. Officials and scribes internalized these principles, ensuring that governance aligned with ethical imperatives. Even in commerce, agriculture, and education, religiously informed norms structured behavior, creating a society in which moral and civic order were inseparable. Death and afterlife beliefs were equally pervasive. Proper burial rituals emphasized the purity of earth, fire, and water. Bodies were often exposed in dogmas or towers of silence to avoid contaminating sacred elements, reflecting a profound respect for natural and divine law. Funerary rites included prayers, offerings, and communal gatherings, ensuring that the deceased's passage was honorable and aligned with cosmic order. Through religion, Persians navigated life's challenges and celebrated its triumphs. Faith informed ethical choices, daily routines, public ceremonies, and personal reflection. It guided how individuals worked, interacted, and participated in community life, linking the human experience to both cosmic and social order. In every ritual, prayer, and festival, the principles of Zoroastrianism were tangible, shaping not just belief but the rhythm and texture of everyday existence in the empire. The Persian Empire's vast expanse required not only governance but a disciplined and adaptable military to defend its borders, maintain internal order, and project power across diverse territories. Military life was both rigorous and structured, reflecting the empire's sophistication in organization, strategy, and logistics. Soldiers were integral to society, respected for their skill and valor, and trained from youth to fulfill duties that extended beyond the battlefield into civic and ceremonial life. The Persian Empire's vast expanse required not only governance but a disciplined and adaptable military to defend its borders, maintain internal order, and project power across diverse territories. Military life was both rigorous and structured, reflecting the empire's sophistication in organization, strategy, and logistics. Soldiers were integral to society, respected for their skill and valor, and trained from youth to fulfill duties that extended beyond the battlefield into civic and ceremonial life. From early adolescence, boys destined for military service were exposed to physical training, weapons handling, and the principles of discipline and loyalty. Archery, swordsmanship, and spear techniques were emphasized, with drills conducted on training grounds or in controlled environments within fortifications. Horseback riding was particularly vital, as cavalry units were central to the Persian army's mobility and tactical advantage. Young trainees learned not only to ride but to coordinate movements with other riders, mastering speed, precision, and communication essential for large-scale maneuvers. Infantry soldiers were trained in formation tactics, endurance, and teamwork. Shields and spears were standard equipment, and synchronized drills ensured cohesion in battle. Soldiers learned to maintain discipline under pressure, to protect comrades, and to execute commands with precision. Units were often grouped by region or ethnic composition, drawing on local knowledge while integrating diverse fighting styles into a cohesive imperial force. Such organization allowed the army to adapt to terrain, climate, and enemy tactics across vast and varied landscapes. The Persian army was famously diverse, incorporating units from across the empire. Archers from Anatolia, cavalry from the Iranian plateau, and infantry from Mesopotamia each contributed unique skills. This diversity required both rigorous training and cultural coordination, ensuring that units could operate effectively despite differences in language, equipment, and tradition. Commanders emphasized communication, hierarchy, and shared discipline, creating a military machine capable of projecting authority and responding to threats swiftly. Logistics were crucial to military success. Supply lines for food, water, weapons, and forage were meticulously planned, often following the same roads and caravan routes used for commerce. Soldiers relied on portable rations, dried meats, grains, and preserved fruits, enabling campaigns that spanned weeks or months. Encampments were organized with efficiency in mind, balancing protection, sanitation, and proximity to water sources. Engineers constructed fortifications, bridges, and defensive works to secure positions and maintain operational readiness. Ceremonial and social aspects of military life reinforced loyalty and morale. Soldiers participated in rituals and oaths to honor the king, gods, and their comrades. Parades, drills, and festivals highlighted valor and discipline, providing both motivation and public recognition. Rewards, honors, and symbols of rank were displayed through clothing, insignia, and ceremonial weapons, reflecting achievement while reinforcing the hierarchical structure essential to operational effectiveness. Persian warfare emphasized strategy as much as strength. Commanders studied terrain, climate, and enemy behavior, deploying troops in formations that balanced offense and defense. Cavalry often executed flanking maneuvers, while archers provided ranged support. Infantry held key positions, protecting supply lines and securing objectives. Siege techniques, including battering rams, towers, and tunnels, demonstrated ingenuity, while intelligence gathering, scouts, and local knowledge informed decision-making. This combination of discipline, strategy, and adaptability made Persian forces formidable across varied theaters of operation. Life off the battlefield was equally regimented. Soldiers engaged in maintenance of equipment, practice drills, and administrative duties. Many were stationed near cities or fortresses, contributing to infrastructure, guarding trade routes, or assisting in civil projects. Training was continuous, ensuring readiness while also providing a structured rhythm to daily life. Meals, rest, and recreation were incorporated to maintain physical and mental health, creating an environment in which discipline coexisted with community and camaraderie. Specialized units, such as the elite immortals, were symbols of Persian military excellence. These soldiers were heavily armed, constantly reinforced to maintain their numbers, and often served as royal bodyguards or rapid response forces. Their presence exemplified both the prestige of military service and the empire's capacity to maintain elite units capable of decisive action, projecting authority and inspiring both fear and respect among allies and adversaries. Military campaigns were punctuated by logistics, ceremonies, and interaction with local populations. Soldiers engaged with villagers for supplies, coordinated with local leaders, and sometimes enforced tribute collection, blending martial and administrative roles. Knowledge of local terrain, climate, and customs was essential for success, emphasizing adaptability alongside courage and skill. Campaigns were grueling yet meticulously organized, requiring endurance, intelligence, and cohesion. In essence, military life in Persia was a balance of discipline, skill, and cultural integration. Soldiers were trained not only to fight but to navigate complex social, logistical, and ceremonial landscapes. From rigorous drills to strategic deployment, from communal living in encampments to participation in public ceremonies, military service shaped individuals and reinforced the structures that sustained the empire's stability, security, and influence. Food in the Persian Empire was far more than sustenance. It was a reflection of culture, status, and the sophisticated blending of geography and resources across a vast realm. From the bustling kitchens of palaces to humble village hearths, meals were carefully prepared, reflecting seasonal availability, regional specialties, and centuries of culinary knowledge passed down through families and communities. Grains formed the backbone of Persian diets. Wheat, barley, and rice were staples, prepared in diverse ways, baked into flatbreads, boiled as porridge, or crafted into layered dishes for festive occasions. Bread was both a daily necessity and a ceremonial item, sometimes broken and shared communally, symbolizing unity and hospitality. Barley was often used to create stews or fermented into beverages, demonstrating the ingenuity of using every resource available. Vegetables and legumes played a prominent role, cultivated in household gardens or obtained from markets. Lentils, chickpeas, onions, garlic, and leafy greens were simmered in aromatic broths or stews, often flavored with herbs, spices, and fermented condiments. Fruits were eaten fresh, dried, or preserved with honey and syrup, creating a spectrum of tastes that complemented staple dishes. Seasonal fruits such as pomegranates, dates, figs, and melons were prized for their flavor and symbolic significance, particularly during festivals and religious rituals. Meat consumption varied by social status and occasion. Wealthier families and royal households enjoyed lamb, goat, poultry, and occasionally game, often roasted, stewed, or spiced for ceremonial feasts. Hunters supplied urban markets with venison, boar, and birds, while fishermen brought fish from rivers and coastal regions. Preservation techniques, including salting, smoking, and drying, ensured availability during long journeys, festivals, and military campaigns. Soldiers relied on these methods during campaigns, combining practical necessity with culinary tradition. Dairy products were widely consumed. Yogurt, cheese, and milk were essential both in everyday cooking and as portable food for travelers and laborers. Butter and clarified butter, known as ghee, were used to enhance flavor and provide energy, particularly in cold or labor-intensive regions. Honey was another key ingredient, serving as a natural sweetener, preservative, and symbolic element in festive foods. Spices and herbs elevated Persian cuisine, transforming simple ingredients into complex, aromatic dishes. Coriander, cumin, cinnamon, saffron, and dill were carefully measured and blended to create layers of flavor, reflecting both trade connections and culinary artistry. Herbs such as mint, basil, and parsley were used fresh or dried, imparting fragrance and subtle taste, while vinegar, fermented sauces, and pomegranate molasses provided tang and depth. The sophisticated use of spices demonstrated both knowledge and appreciation of taste, health, and social refinement. Dining customs reflected hierarchy, ceremony, and hospitality. In elite households, meals were often communal yet structured, with seating arrangements based on rank or age. Platters were shared, encouraging conversation and interaction, while servants attended to guests' needs. In royal settings, elaborate banquets featured multiple courses, music, poetry, and sometimes storytelling, transforming dining into a cultural and social performance. Ceremonial dishes were meticulously arranged, combining color, texture, and aroma to create multisensory experiences that celebrated abundance and refinement. In rural areas and ordinary households, meals were simpler but no less meaningful. Families gathered around central hearths, sharing stews, bread, and seasonal vegetables. Food preparation was labor-intensive, involving grinding grains, kneading dough, chopping vegetables, and tending firewood. Cooking was a communal activity, often involving multiple generations, fostering bonds, teaching practical skills, and embedding cultural knowledge in everyday routines. Beverages complemented meals, ranging from water and fermented dairy drinks to fruit juices and diluted wine for those permitted to consume it. Tea, while not yet widespread, was sometimes consumed as a herbal infusion, reflecting local plant knowledge. Social drinking, particularly during celebrations, reinforced hospitality and communal bonds, while also serving as a medium for storytelling, poetry recitation, and negotiation in both markets and palaces. Food also played a symbolic and religious role. Certain dishes were prepared for festivals, religious ceremonies, and funerary rites, carrying meanings of renewal, prosperity, or purification. Meals reinforced cultural values, teaching respect for nature, gratitude for provision, and the importance of generosity. Sharing food with neighbors, travelers, and the less fortunate was both an ethical expectation and a practical way of fostering community cohesion. Even the act of eating was guided by aesthetic sensibilities. Presentation mattered. Colors, shapes, and textures were carefully considered, plates arranged to delight the eye and the palate. Seasonal decorations, fruit carvings, and arrangements of nuts or dried fruits elevated ordinary meals into memorable experiences. The sensory engagement, smell, taste, touch, and sight, was as important as nutrition, embedding food deeply into the cultural and emotional life of Persians. Ultimately, Persian cuisine was a microcosm of the empire itself, diverse, connected, and layered with meaning. It combined practicality with artistry, local resources with long-distance trade, and sustenance with social and spiritual significance. In every meal, whether humble or opulent, Persians experienced history, culture, and community, savoring both the flavors of the land and the intricate traditions that made eating an essential expression of life and identity. Clothing in Persia was not merely functional. It was an intricate expression of identity, status, climate adaptation, and cultural values. From the bustling streets of cities to the rural plains, the garments people wore reflected their position in society, occupation, and participation in ceremonial or everyday life. Fabrics, dyes, and styles were carefully chosen, combining artistry, practicality, and symbolic meaning in ways that distinguished one region, social class, or profession from another. Everyday clothing for men typically consisted of tunics made from wool, linen, or cotton, often layered for warmth or modesty. Tunics could be short or long, fitted or loose, depending on the wearer's activity or status. Belts, sashes, or cords were used to secure garments, while trousers allowed freedom of movement, particularly for laborers, soldiers, and travelers. Sleeves varied in width. Narrow sleeves suited work and mobility, while broader sleeves indicated leisure or ceremonial occasions. Cloaks and mantles provided protection from cold, dust, or sun, often lined or decorated to convey wealth or distinction. Women's attire was elaborate and expressive. Long dresses with layered skirts, adorned with embroidery, beads, or patterned fabric, were common among both urban and rural populations. Scarves, veils, and head coverings reflected modesty, social norms, or ceremonial appropriateness, while also serving practical purposes such as protection from sun and dust. Wealthier women wore garments made of fine silks, brightly dyed and intricately patterned, often accompanied by jewelry crafted from gold, silver, or precious stones. These adornments were not merely decorative. They signaled social position, familial wealth, and cultural affiliation. Textiles were highly valued, both for local use and long-distance trade. Persian weaving techniques produced woolen, linen, and silk fabrics with intricate patterns, geometric motifs, and floral designs. Colors were achieved through natural dyes derived from plants, minerals, and insects, producing vibrant blues, reds, yellows, and greens that were resistant to fading. Decorative techniques such as embroidery, applique, and tassels added layers of visual complexity, making garments both durable and aesthetically refined. These textiles were often exchanged as valuable commodities, linking fashion to commerce, economy, and cultural exchange across the empire. Footwear and accessories completed attire. Sandals made from leather, boots for colder regions, and soft shoes for indoor use reflected climate, activity, and social norms. Belts, pouches, and ornamental pins served practical and decorative purposes, securing clothing while signaling style and status. Jewelry, including rings, bracelets, necklaces, and hair ornaments, was worn by both men and women, incorporating gemstones, gold, and silver. Even the choice of colors, patterns, and ornamentation conveyed identity, family affiliation, and sometimes allegiance to local or imperial authorities. Ceremonial and court attire was especially elaborate. Kings, nobles, and high-ranking officials donned robes of silk or fine wool, embroidered with gold thread, adorned with symbolic motifs, and paired with headdresses or crowns denoting rank. Soldiers wore uniforms that combined protection, mobility, and visual distinction, while priests' garments reflected ritual purity, often white or richly decorated, aligning with Zoroastrian principles of order and holiness. These variations ensured that clothing communicated both functional and symbolic information at a glance, making fashion a key element of social structure. Seasonal adaptations were common. In the hot lowlands, lighter fabrics and looser garments provided ventilation and comfort, while in colder regions, layered clothing, furs, and thick woolens protected against harsh winter conditions. Travel attire balanced practicality with social norms, allowing individuals to move efficiently while maintaining a presentable appearance. Even soldiers' garments were adjusted for climate and campaign needs, reflecting the Persian emphasis on adaptability and foresight. The production of textiles involved skilled labor and collaboration. Weavers, dyers, embroiderers, and seamstresses worked in workshops, home studios, or guild-like structures, transmitting knowledge across generations. Dyeing processes were labor-intensive, often involving multiple stages to achieve desired shades, while weaving techniques required precision, rhythm, and expertise. The finished fabrics were valued not only for utility but as cultural and artistic expressions, with patterns sometimes signifying local origin, spiritual symbolism, or imperial favor. Clothing also played a role in festivals, rituals, and daily etiquette. Specific colors, patterns, or styles were worn during religious ceremonies, seasonal celebrations, or royal audiences, reinforcing social and spiritual codes. In marketplaces, dress could communicate economic status, occupation, or regional origin, guiding interactions and expectations. Even casual attire carried implicit information about propriety, identity, and social norms, embedding clothing into the moral, cultural, and aesthetic fabric of Persian life. Ultimately, Persian fashion reflected the empire's complexity and interconnectedness. It combined artistry, practicality, and symbolism in every thread, stitch, and dye. Through clothing, individuals navigated social hierarchies, expressed identity, participated in cultural rituals, and adapted to the environment. From humble tunics to elaborately embroidered court robes, every garment was a testament to the ingenuity, aesthetic sensibility, and cultural richness that defined daily life across the Persian Empire. As we draw near the conclusion of this journey through the Persian Empire at the height of its glory, it becomes clear that Persia was more than its grand palaces, vast armies, and intricate roads. It was a living tapestry of human endeavor, culture, and daily life that resonated across centuries. From the bustling markets to the quiet corners of family homes, from ceremonial fire temples to sprawling gardens, every aspect of life reflected a balance between practicality, beauty, and moral order. Families continued their routines shaped by tradition and religion, raising children with stories of valor, ethics, and cosmic balance. Children learned not only reading and arithmetic but also social responsibility, respect for nature, and the significance of rituals. Boys and girls participated in household chores, farming tasks, and preparation for future roles, blending play with education in ways that connected personal experience to the wider society. Elders passed down oral histories, folk tales, and practical knowledge, ensuring continuity even as the empire evolved. Commerce remained central to life, linking distant provinces, facilitating cultural exchange, and sustaining livelihoods. Markets thrived as hubs of sensory richness and human interaction, where merchants offered silk, spices, pottery, and metals alongside news, stories, and ideas. The royal road and caravan routes enabled travelers to connect with distant regions, bringing with them not only goods but also innovations, fashions, and philosophies that enriched the empire's cultural mosaic. Architecture, gardens, and urban design continued to embody Persian ideals of harmony, beauty, and utility. Palaces, temples, and homes demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of materials, climate adaptation, and aesthetic principles, creating spaces that were both functional and inspiring. Gardens offered sensory delight and spiritual reflection. Public squares facilitated commerce and social interaction, and carefully planned streets guided movement, conversation, and daily rhythm. The army, ever disciplined and diverse, ensured the safety and stability that allowed such rich cultural life to flourish. Soldiers balanced rigorous training with ceremonial duties, blending martial skill with civic responsibility. Elite units, including the famed immortals, symbolized both protection and prestige, while logistics, supply lines, and engineering enabled campaigns that shaped not only borders but the very fabric of society. Food, clothing, and textiles reflected the interconnectedness of Persian life. Meals were artful, blending local produce, grains, meats, fruits, and spices into both everyday sustenance and ceremonial feasts, teaching community, hospitality, and aesthetic appreciation. Clothing signified status, occupation, and identity, combining practicality with artistry and reinforcing social and cultural codes. Textiles were treasured, produced with skill, and circulated through trade, connecting Persian creativity to broader networks of influence. Religion, particularly Zoroastrianism, imbued daily routines with meaning, guiding ethical choices, ritual practice, and social cohesion. Fire temples, festivals, prayers, and moral precepts linked the mundane with the divine, reinforcing a worldview in which human action was inseparable from cosmic order. Pilgrimages, ceremonies, and seasonal rituals intertwined faith with family, community, and governance, shaping the psychological and cultural landscape of the empire. Education and the transmission of knowledge ensured continuity and advancement. Schools, libraries, and mentorship cultivated literacy, mathematics, philosophy, and moral reasoning. Scribes recorded law, history, and religious texts, preserving the empire's intellectual legacy while facilitating administration and governance. Knowledge was both practical and philosophical, teaching citizens to navigate their environment, society, and ethical responsibilities with insight and skill. Ultimately, the Persian Empire's greatness lay in its integration of people, resources, ideas, and belief into a cohesive civilization that endured far beyond its temporal boundaries. Its roads connected continents, its markets linked cultures, its gardens nurtured both body and spirit, and its rituals shaped the ethical and social life of countless individuals. Daily life was a constant interplay between order and creativity, practicality and beauty, duty and celebration. As we reflect on the Persian Empire, we see a civilization that, despite the passage of centuries, continues to influence architecture, governance, trade, religion, and culture across the world. Its achievements were not confined to kings and conquerors alone. They were embedded in the routines of farmers, artisans, merchants, soldiers, and families. Life in Persia at its height was vibrant, complex, and profoundly human, demonstrating that the story of an empire is ultimately the story of its people, their choices, labors, joys, and enduring contributions. Through this exploration, one can imagine walking along the streets of Persepolis, smelling spices in the market, hearing the call of priests at dawn, witnessing soldiers training in the sun, and tasting the sweetness of pomegranates and dates in a quiet garden. Persia was alive in every detail, a civilization where the mundane and the magnificent coexisted, leaving a legacy that continues to echo in history, art, and the imagination of those who study its life and culture. Even as centuries passed and empires rose and fell, the essence of Persian life, its integration of beauty, ethics, innovation, and community, remains a testament to what human societies can achieve when imagination, organization, and culture intertwine. It is in these small daily acts, from the simplest meal to the grandest festival, that the spirit of Persia endures, inviting us to step into a world where life was carefully lived, richly adorned, and profoundly interconnected.